When we first encounter the engineers in Prometheus, their intentions toward humanity are far from benevolent. Human crew, having journeyed light years in search of their creators, are met with a swift and violent response, leaving a central question hanging heavily in the air. Why do the engineers, our supposed creators, harbor such animosity towards humanity? To truly uncover the reasons behind their aggression, we need to delve deeper than the film explicitly shows us, examining the rich tapestry of clues and implications woven into the narrative. One of the most plausible explanations comes directly from Ridley Scott himself. In various interviews, Scott revealed that the engineers were not always hostile. In fact, they were originally quite fond of humanity. According to Scott, the engineers viewed themselves as gardeners of the cosmos, voyaging to distant planets to plant the seeds of life. They nurtured and cultivated life across the galaxy, seeing themselves as cosmic caretakers. Earth was just one of their many projects, a place where they had carefully guided the development of the human species. They watched over our primitive ancestors, subtly influencing their evolution, much like a loving parent guiding a child. But as time passed, their perspective underwent a chilling transformation. What had begun as a hopeful experiment, full of promise, gradually morphed into something far more grim. They began to see humanity as a failed experiment, violent, destructive, and utterly incapable of living up to their lofty expectations. Our capacity for both great innovation and unspeakable cruelty became a source of profound disappointment. The breaking point for the engineers seems to have occurred roughly 2,000 years ago during the height of the Roman Empire. This period marks a significant turning point in humanity's relationship with its creators. Scott suggests that the engineers, in a final desperate attempt to guide humanity down a more enlightened path, sent an emissary to Earth, someone we might interpret as a Christ-like figure. This emissary was meant to teach humanity the values of peace, compassion, and wisdom. He came bearing a message of hope, offering a path towards enlightenment and selflessness. However, instead of embracing this emissary, humanity rejected and ultimately crucified him. This act of violence against the very being sent to help us marked the moment when the engineers decided that humanity was beyond saving. The crucifixion was, in their eyes, the ultimate betrayal. This theory positions the engineers as deeply disappointed parents, watching their creations spiral into chaos and bloodshed. To them, the crucifixion of this emissary was not just a rejection of their guidance, but an act of betrayal. Humanity, in their eyes, had proven itself incapable of redemption. We had squandered the gifts they had bestowed upon us and descended into barbarity. In response, the engineers began to prepare a final solution: the eradication of the human race. The star map that led the crew of the Prometheus to LV-223 wasn't an invitation. It was a roadmap to our destruction, a guide to the weapon that would cleanse our world. It was a grim testament to their shattered dreams. But there's another layer to this story, a subtle nuance that suggests the engineers' hatred for humanity may not be as unanimous as it first appears. Some theories propose that the engineers are not a monolithic group. Instead, they may be divided into two distinct factions, one devoted to creation and the other committed to destruction. The creators see themselves as the architects of life, spreading it throughout the universe, carefully nurturing and guiding its development. The destroyers, however, believe that any life outside of their own species is an abomination. To them, life should not be allowed to evolve freely, and any species that attempts to rise to their level is a threat to their cosmic order. They see themselves as the ultimate arbiters of existence. This internal conflict among the engineers could explain why they initially created life on Earth, only to later attempt to annihilate it. Perhaps the creators saw humanity as a promising experiment, a species with the potential to rise to greatness. But over time, the destroyers gained influence, convincing the rest of the engineers that humanity was a danger to the galaxy. This schism may have reached its peak when the destroyers decided that humanity's time had come to an end. The decision to unleash the black goo upon our planet might have been a victory for this faction. The very fate of humanity hung in the balance. One of the most haunting ideas in Prometheus revolves around the engineers' use of the black goo, a mysterious substance capable of transforming and destroying life. Some speculate that the engineers use this bioweapon to test civilizations. When a species reaches a certain level of technological advancement, the engineers unleash the black goo to see if they can withstand its destructive power. If the species can survive the transformation, they are deemed worthy to continue existing. If not, their planet is wiped clean, a cosmic reset. The black goo acts as both a creator and a destroyer, a tool that embodies the engineer's complex relationship with life itself. It's a litmus test for civilization, a trial by fire. This scenario, humanity's development of space travel, may have been the catalyst for the engineer's decision to exterminate us. By journeying to LV-2223, the Prometheus crew demonstrated that humanity had crossed a line. We had developed the ability to leave our planet, to explore the stars, and potentially to challenge the engineer's dominance in the galaxy. From the engineer's perspective, this was the ultimate transgression. Combined with their already low opinion of humanity's violent tendencies, our arrival on LV-223 may have been the final straw. The engineers may have seen us not just as a failed experiment, but as a threat that needed to be neutralized. But there's also a more personal aspect to the engineers' hatred for humanity, one that plays out in the final moments of Prometheus. David, the synthetic android created by the human crew, plays a pivotal role in the last encounter between the last engineer and humanity. When the engineer first awakens, he seems calm, almost curious. He surveys the room with a detached interest, perhaps wondering why these creatures had come so far to find him. But when he lays eyes on David, his curiosity turns to rage. The engineer attacks David with sudden and violent force, ripping his head from his body without hesitation. Why does the sight of David provoke such an extreme reaction? One theory suggests that the engineer is disgusted by the sight of a non-biological creation. In the engineer's worldview, the act of creating life is a sacred, godlike power, one that only they are entitled to wield. By creating David, humanity had crossed yet another line. We had not only developed space travel, but we had also dared to play God ourselves. David, as an artificial life form, represents humanity's attempt to replicate the divine act of creation. To the engineer, this is an unforgivable sin. His violent response to David is not just an attack on the android, it's a symbolic rejection of humanity's hubris. Ridley Scott's explanation, coupled with these theories, paints a picture of a species that is both godlike and deeply flawed. The engineers are creators, but they are also destroyers, willing to obliterate their creations when they fall short of perfection. In many ways, their relationship with humanity mirrors the myth of Prometheus, the titan who defied the gods to give fire to mankind. Just as the gods punished Prometheus for his rebellion, the engineers seek to punish humanity for what they see as our transgressions. This brings us back to the central theme of Prometheus, creation and its consequences. The engineers' hatred for humanity is not born out of jealousy or fear, but out of disappointment. We are their creation, but in their eyes we've strayed too far from the path they intended. The violence, the greed, the destruction, these are not the traits the engineers had hoped to cultivate. They see us as a species that has failed to live up to its potential, and now they want to start over. But beneath their disappointment lies something more complex. The engineers' decision to wipe out humanity may also be rooted in a fear of what we could become. As we continue to evolve, as we develop new technologies and push the boundaries of science, we may one day surpass the engineers themselves. This, perhaps, is the ultimate reason for their hatred. It's not just that we failed, it's that we might succeed in ways they cannot control. The tragedy of the engineers is that they are both creators and destroyers, bound by their own vision of perfection. Their hatred for humanity is a reflection of their own flaws, their inability to accept the imperfections of life. In trying to shape the universe in their image, they have become trapped in a cycle of creation and destruction, unable to break free from the very forces they sought to control. In the end, they're just the star. It seemed the maps, perhaps when we the religion in many the engine adding to this in this the arc the the most the star the sim in the star. It's this internal conflict could explain why the engineers both created and attempted to destroy life on Earth. The star maps in this case might represent the actions of a rogue faction of engineers attempting to guide humanity toward their ultimate goal, while another faction sought to wipe us out before we became too powerful. The concept of LV-223 as a testing ground also raises fascinating questions about the engineers' ultimate plan for humanity. Could it be that the journey to LV-223 was not intended to be an invitation, but rather a final test of whether humanity was worthy of ascending to the engineer's level? If so, the black goo might have been the ultimate trial, designed to test our resilience, intelligence, and ability to adapt. The engineers may have watched from afar, waiting to see how we would handle the horrors unleashed by the goo. If humanity survived, perhaps we would have been invited to join them. But if we failed, as the Prometheus crew did, the engineers would deem us unworthy and prepare to start over. The religious and mythological parallels in Prometheus further enrich the symbolism of the star maps. The engineers' relationship with humanity mirrors stories of gods guiding and punishing their creations. Just as gods in ancient myths would test humanity's worthiness, the engineers may have left the star maps as a form of divine challenge. The maps point to LV-223, a place of reckoning where humanity would face the consequences of its actions. In this context, the journey to LV-223 becomes a pilgrimage of sorts, with humanity seeking answers from its creators only to be met with destruction. Ultimately, the reason the engineers left the map to LV-223 remains one of the most tantalizing mysteries of Prometheus. Whether it was an invitation, a warning, or a cosmic test, one thing is certain: the engineers have been watching us. They've seen our progress, our triumphs, and our failures. And when the time came for humanity to seek out its creators, the engineers were ready to make their final judgment. The star map, whether a symbol of hope or doom, represents the fragile and complex relationship between humanity and its creators, a relationship defined by both wonder and fear, creation and destruction. In the theatrical release of Prometheus, the final encounter between the last surviving engineer and the human crew is a rapid, brutal sequence. The engineer says nothing, allowing his physical response, pure rage and violence, to speak volumes as he attacks without hesitation. This leaves audiences to speculate about what might have been going through his mind. However, a deleted scene from the Blu-ray edition of the film reveals a much more nuanced and detailed version of these events, with an entire conversation unfolding between the engineer, David, and Peter Weyland. This additional dialogue not only illuminates the engineer's mindset, but also deepens our understanding of their complex philosophy, their disdain for humanity, and the underlying themes of creation, mortality, and hubris that drive the narrative. The deleted scene begins with Weyland instructing David to communicate with the engineer using an ancient language that David had been practicing throughout the film. As David begins to speak, the engineer listens intently. Unlike the cold and immediate violence of the theatrical release, this engineer appears almost calm, curious about the humans who have ventured so far to find him. His first question to David is simple yet profound. "Why have you come?" David translates this for Weyland, whose answer encapsulates one of the central themes of the alien universe: humanity's obsession with transcending its limitations. Weyland: "I am Peter Weyland, and I am here seeking the secret to immortality. When a dying man on the brink of death reveals his reason for seeking the engineer, he has come to ask for more life." His request echoes themes from another Ridley Scott film, Blade Runner, where the android Roy Batty similarly sought more life from his creator, only to be denied. Weyland's request for immortality is not merely personal. It represents humanity's broader struggle with its own mortality and the desire to overcome the natural limitations imposed by life and death. In Weyland's eyes, as the creator of David, a synthetic being, he believes he deserves to live forever, as though his role as a creator places him on par with the engineers themselves. However, the engineer's response is far from what Weyland hoped. According to the deleted scene, the engineer asks why humanity believes it deserves eternal life. Weyland's speech, a bold declaration of his own greatness, is met with cold indifference. The engineer listens, but ultimately he rejects Weyland's plea outright. This refusal to grant immortality is deeply significant, as it ties directly into one of the core themes of Prometheus, the engineer's belief in the natural cycle of life and death. For the engineers, creation comes at a cost, and their philosophy is rooted in the acceptance of this fundamental truth. As seen in the opening scene of the film, one of the engineers sacrifices himself to seed life on a planet, willingly disintegrating to release his DNA into the environment. This act of self-sacrifice is central to their understanding of creation. Life cannot exist without death. The cycle must continue. Wayland's desire to live forever goes against this natural order, and in the engineer's eyes, it is an affront to the very principles of life. Wayland's arrogance, his refusal to accept the inevitability of death, mirrors the very flaws that led the engineers to lose faith in humanity in the first place. Rejecting Wayland, the engineer is not simply denying one man's quest for immortality, he is rejecting humanity's overreaching ambition. Humans, in the eyes of the engineers, have strayed too far from the natural order. We have developed technology that allows us to manipulate life itself, creating synthetic beings like David, and in doing so, we have attempted to play God. The engineers see this as a transgression, a violation of the boundaries that separate creators from their creations. By asking for more life, Wayland reinforces this belief. He is not satisfied with the life he has been given and believes that his ability to create grants him the right to transcend death. The engineers, however, see this as the ultimate flaw in humanity's character, the refusal to accept limitations. The deleted dialogue also offers a deeper understanding of the engineer's reaction to David. Initially, the engineer appears intrigued by the synthetic android, observing him with a kind of detached curiosity. However, this curiosity quickly turns to disgust when he realizes that David is an artificial being created by humans. In the engineer's eyes, humanity's attempt to create life in their own image is not an achievement but a transgression. The engineer's violent response to David, ripping off his head with brute force, is not just an attack on the android but a symbolic rejection of humanity's hubris. David represents the pinnacle of human technological advancement, and in destroying him, the engineer is making a clear statement: humanity has crossed a line. This scene also ties into the broader religious and mythological allegories woven throughout Prometheus. Much like when however, he views however, Wayland's much like the engine, they are no just as this, they're it deep Wayland's, however, the moon, long after this, what was once a barren, rocky, and inhospitable environment begins to transform into something far more dangerous and alive. The black goo, now spilled across the surface and ecosystems of LV-2223, begins to alter everything it touches. This mysterious bioweapon designed to destroy and evolve life forms simultaneously accelerates growth within the moon's ecosystems. Vegetation, once scarce in the barren landscape, rapidly begins to flourish. What was once a desolate battlefield between humanity and its creators becomes a lush, organic jungle teeming with alien life, both beautiful and terrifying. The ampules of black goo left behind in the engineer military outpost are scattered into the environment, accelerating the growth of new species and creating what appears to be a thriving, albeit dangerous, ecosystem. Plants, insects, and predatory species alike evolve at an unprecedented rate, introducing alien life forms that seem otherworldly even by the standards of the engineer's dark technology. As the black goo continues to seep into the soil and the atmosphere, even the moon's climate changes, creating a breathable atmosphere, a once impossible condition for human life. However, this new ecosystem is anything but welcoming. Every life form on LV-223 is now influenced by the mutagenic properties of the black goo, creating organisms that are predatory, rapidly evolving, and hostile. 1 year after the fateful Prometheus mission, a probe is sent to LV-223 to investigate what remains. However, this probe encounters more than anticipated. While the surface of the moon may seem transformed, one element remains unchanged: the engineers. A surviving engineer, still hidden within the depths of the military installation, destroys the probe before it can gather any critical data. This revelation suggests that not all of the engineers were killed during the events of Prometheus. Some may have survived, perhaps in cryosleep, awaiting the return of humans or some other species to continue their dark experiments. This lone engineer, or others like him, could still be observing, waiting for the right moment to either reclaim their lost dominion or unleash another destructive force across the galaxy. Their plans for humanity and the black goo remain uncertain, but their presence continues to cast a shadow over the fate of LV-223. But the story of LV-223 does not end there. In the decades that follow, human expeditions continue to return to the moon, seeking to unlock the secrets of the engineers and the black goo. One such expedition, occurring 86 years after the Prometheus mission, involves a cargo ship that crash lands on LV-223. The crew, initially believing they have neutralized a xenomorph threat during their journey, quickly discover that one of the creatures has survived. This particular xenomorph, having evolved within the moon's altered ecosystem, is far more dangerous and resilient than its predecessors. Alongside the many other alien species that have evolved on LV-223, the xenomorph begins to hunt the surviving crew members, turning the moon into a battleground of survival once again. This event marks a significant escalation of the conflict between humanity and the dark forces that the engineers once controlled. 40 years later, LV-223 becomes the subject of intense interest once again. This time, a human expedition arrives with a different mission: to uncover the fate of Peter Weyland and the original Prometheus crew. Led by a documentary crew, this expedition aims to record the lost history of one of humanity's most notorious ventures into space. However, what they find is far more dangerous than anything they could have anticipated. LV-223, now home to not only xenomorphs but also surviving engineers and even predators, has transformed into a battlefield of galactic proportions. The few surviving engineers, having reawakened from cryosleep or some other form of stasis, are determined to continue their mission of eradicating humanity. At the same time, the xenomorphs and predators wage war over the moon's resources, transforming LV-223 into a chaotic war zone where survival is the only law. This conflict between three dead species, xenomorphs, predators, and engineers, reveals the true legacy of LV-223. What was once a military outpost for bioweapon development has now become a planet-sized arena for interspecies warfare. The technological remnants of the engineers, combined with the mutagenic effects of the black goo, have turned the moon into a place where evolution runs unchecked, creating a breeding ground for both life and death. Human expeditions, once eager to unlock the secrets of the engineers, now only find themselves caught in the crossfire of ancient battles fought between gods and monsters. One of the most bizarre and fascinating developments in LV-223's history is the fate of the Deacon, the alien creature born from the last surviving engineer at the end of Prometheus. Over the course of more than 100 years, this monstrous being evolves and mutates, growing to an enormous size. By the time later human expeditions arrive, the Deacon has fused with the landscape itself, its massive form now resembling a mountain. This grotesque biomechanical fusion serves as a chilling reminder of the engineer's dark legacy. The Deacon, born from the combination of human and engineer DNA, is a testament to the destructive potential of the black goo. Now part of the moon's terrain, it looms as a monument to the horrors unleashed by the engineer experiments, a towering symbol of what happens when the lines between creation and destruction are blurred. The black goo legacy on LV-223 is not limited to biological transformations. The very technology left behind by the engineers has also evolved. Structures that were once dormant or destroyed have become reactivated, seemingly in response to the presence of new life. The temples and military installations scattered across LV-223 have become living organisms themselves, merging with the environment in unpredictable ways. These biomechanical structures now serve as both traps and sanctuaries for the life forms that inhabit the moon, further complicating the already dangerous landscape. As LV-223 transforms from a once-dead military outpost into a thriving ecosystem teeming with hostile alien life, it becomes clear that the story of Prometheus did not end with the death of its crew. Instead, the moon has become a living testament to the engineers' dark experiments, a place where life and death, creation and destruction are in constant conflict. The remnants of the engineers' technology, combined with the black goo's mutagenic properties, have created a world that is forever evolving, forever dangerous. LV-223 is no longer just a battlefield. It is a living, breathing monument to the potential and the peril of playing God. The story of LV-223 is far from over. As new life forms continue to evolve and as humans and other species return to the moon in search of knowledge or conquest, the fate of LV-223 remains uncertain. What is clear, however, is that LV-223 will forever be a place where the consequences of creation and destruction are on full display, a place where the legacy of the engineers, the horrors of the black goo, and the dangers of human curiosity collide in ways that will shape the future of the galaxy. Dr. Elizabeth Shaw's journey into the heart of one of the most profound mysteries of the universe began long before the fateful events of Prometheus. From a young age, Shaw harbored a deep fascination with the question of humanity's origins. What compelled her wasn't just scientific curiosity, it was a profound personal quest that took root in her after a series of tragic and defining life experiences. These moments shaped her into the determined, resilient figure who would stop at nothing to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Was born in 2061 in South Africa, a country defined by a complex intersection of cultures, history, and belief systems. This environment had a profound impact on her worldview, especially in terms of understanding life, death, and the human place in the universe. Raised in an atmosphere of faith and science, Shaw's Christian upbringing provided her with a spiritual lens through which she viewed the mysteries of existence. Her faith, however, was not rigid. Instead, it was a framework that allowed her to ask big questions about the origins of life and the nature of creation. Tragedy struck her early, and these losses further fueled her quest for understanding. His mother passed away from an unknown illness when she was a child, a wound that left a deep emotional scar. This was followed by the death of her father, who succumbed to Ebola when Shaw was still young. This loss was especially impactful. His father had been a medical professional devoted to saving lives, and his passing due to such a cruel and unforgiving disease was a harsh lesson in the fragility of life. These experiences ignited a fire in Shaw, a need to understand life and death, to find meaning in the apparent chaos of the universe. Shaw's intellectual pursuits naturally gravitated toward archaeology and anthropology, fields that would allow her to explore ancient human civilizations and their understanding of life beyond Earth. She was particularly fascinated by how these civilizations, separated by vast distances in time and geography, seemed to share common stories about gods, creation, and the stars. As she dug deeper, Shaw became convinced that these ancient cultures were not merely inventing myths but had experienced something tangible, something real that connected them to the cosmos in ways that modern science had yet to explain. His path took a pivotal turn when she met Charlie Holloway, a fellow archaeologist who shared her interests. Together, they embarked on a groundbreaking series of discoveries that would challenge the very foundations of human history. During an excavation in Africa, Shaw and Holloway discovered a star map etched into the walls of an ancient cave, a map identical to others found across the globe, from the temples of Mesopotamia to the pyramids of Egypt. These maps all pointed to the same location, a distant moon called LV-223. Shaw's excitement was palpable. She believed these maps were evidence of contact between ancient humans and a more advanced species, perhaps even their creators. This belief would come to define her life's work. For Shaw, the star maps were not just archaeological treasures, they were invitations, messages left by beings she believed were the engineers of humanity. Her belief was that these star maps represented an ancient connection between humans and their creators, a signpost left for humanity when it was ready to uncover the truth. She viewed these engineers as benevolent beings, ones who had sparked life on Earth and had, for reasons yet unknown, left humanity to grow on its own. Shaw hoped that by finding these engineers, she would not only unlock the secrets of human origins but also find answers to her own personal struggles, particularly her inability to have children. To her, the engineers represented the ultimate creators, and through them, she might find solace in understanding her own limitations. One of Shaw's most significant archaeological finds was an urn far older than any other artifact she had encountered. Unlike other relics, this urn could not be dated by traditional methods. It was inscribed with geometric patterns far more advanced than the ancient cultures it had supposedly belonged to. Shaw believed the engineers had left these artifacts as markers, perhaps even tools for understanding their power and intentions. The belief grew stronger when she and Holloway uncovered the same star system depicted across multiple ancient civilizations, an anomaly that couldn't be explained by mere coincidence. His conviction that humanity was not alone in the universe and that the engineers had seeded life across Earth solidified into a personal mission. This mission culminated in her decision to join the Prometheus expedition, a bold venture financed by the Wayland Corporation which sought to uncover the truth behind the star maps. This, despite her faith and the hope she carried into the mission, was not naive. She knew the risks involved. The journey to meet one's creators was fraught with unknown dangers, and yet she was willing to sacrifice everything for the chance to find the answers she so desperately sought. In Shaw's mind, this wasn't just a scientific endeavor. It was a spiritual pilgrimage, a quest to connect with the beings who had given humanity life. Once aboard the Prometheus, Shaw's intellectual resolve and personal faith were tested at every turn. From the moment the crew landed on LV-223, it became clear that the answer she sought would not come easily. As they explored the eerie and abandoned structures on the moon, the horrifying truth began to unravel. The engineers, far from the benevolent creators she had imagined, harbored destructive intentions toward humanity. The black goo, an unstable biological weapon of mass destruction, was proof of their darker nature. Instead of finding salvation, Shaw was faced with the possibility that humanity had been nothing more than an experiment, one that the engineers were prepared to wipe clean. But Shaw's spirit remained unbroken. When most of the Prometheus crew met tragic ends at the hands of the engineers or the terrifying effects of the black goo, Shaw pushed forward. Her quest for answers became even more personal after the death of Holloway, who succumbed to the effects of the black goo after being exposed to it during their exploration. Shaw's belief that she could find hope in the engineers was shattered, but her determination to understand why they had created humanity and why they sought to destroy it only